Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being part of this webinar. On behalf of Business Day and the publisher, Frank Ibogun, who I'm sure is probably listening on the ground, I would like to welcome you all. Most especially, I would like to welcome our panelists. They don't come better than this. Andrew, Nkem, Tosin, Dr. Yemi, Tony, Sonny, Jude, and Lanre. We are very, very grateful that you are part of this. So this morning, and I'm not going to spend much time here, we are looking at navigating the uncharted course. And I am not sure because I've asked around, I don't think anyone alive today has seen what we have seen at the moment. So these are truly uncharted territories. And of course, it has implications for every aspect of our lives. It's an health crisis, so it's about survival in the first instance. But after that, it affects all aspects of our life: social, economic, political, security. So I'm not sure anyone can tell for sure what we have in store in the next coming months and in the next 1 year or in the next 2 years. So that is what our panelists will be doing their best to share with us. And I really do hope that we get some very, very valuable insight this morning. Thank you, Tosin, for for agreeing to be the moderator this morning, because I know it's going to be a hell of a task looking at all the issues within the time that we have. But I thank you all, and I really do hope that we enjoy you. I hand over to Tosin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ogol Kitty, the CEO of Business Day, for your kind introduction and for setting the tone for this webinar. Without a doubt, we are navigating a truly uncharted course. Never before have I personally, and I think I speak for everyone, witnessed this level of unsettling fear and uncertainty about our lives, the future of businesses, and the economy. What we plan to do today, myself together with the panelists, is to consider the economic effects of the pandemic across various sectors of the Nigerian economy and to propose appropriate homegrown responses and solutions to minimize the disruptive impact of COVID-19, especially on business continuity and the future of work. I would go quickly now to introduce the panelists so that we can get on with the business of the day. First and foremost, I'd like to introduce Dr. Andrew Nevin, who is the advisory partner and chief economist at PricewaterhouseCoopers, West Africa. You're welcome, Dr. Nevin, and thank you for joining us. We also have with us Mrs. Nkem Dilimbego, the CEO of Future Software Resources Limited. Thank you for joining us, Nkem. We also have with us Mrs. Toyin Sani, who is the CEO of Emerging Africa Capital Group. Thank you, Mrs. Sani, for joining the webinar. We also have the divisional head of trading business at the Nigerian Stock Exchange, Mr. Jude Chiemeka. Mr. Jude Chiemeka, thank you so much for joining the panel. And finally, but by no means the least, we have Mr. Lanre Shotunde, who's the Chief Financial Officer at Optima Energy Resources Limited. Optima Energy Resources Limited has graciously agreed to sponsor this webinar, and we are indeed very grateful to them. Let me just welcome again all our panelists and our participants who are joining us across all the platforms where the webinar is being broadcasted. Thank you so very much for making the time to be with us today. May I mention that our live chat rooms are open across all the platforms, and you may feel free to send questions, comments on the live chat platforms, live chats features on all your platforms. Also, towards the end of the session, we will be taking questions. So please make sure to send your questions on the live chat. And also remember to indicate which of the panelists you are directing your question to. So apologies for that. I think I had I went off for a bit. Thank you. I would like to welcome all participants that are joining us across all the platforms. Please note that our live chat features are functional across all the platforms, and you may wish to send comments or questions on these platforms. Towards the end of the session, we will take these questions, but remember to also note which of the panelists you are directing your questions to. So without further ado, and having welcomed all the panelists, I would like to dive quickly into the questions of the day. In the first session, we're going to be talking about the implications of COVID-19 on business continuity and the future of work. And just by way of background, it's important to note that on account of the pandemic, commercial activities across several sectors have been grounded to near standstill. Majority of small and medium-scale businesses do not have sophisticated business continuity or disaster recovery plans, and many of them struggle with defining appropriate responses to the lockdown and the bogus weight of their payroll when they are facing, challenges that have almost completely thinned out their capacity to generate revenue. And so my first question will be to Mrs. Toyin Sani. At this unique, challenging time, Madam, what kinds of plans do you think that local businesses, especially small businesses, can put in place to achieve resilience and sustainability? Mrs. Sani, over to you.
Thank you, Tosin, for the question. And thank you to Business Day and Deal HQ for putting together this very important conference at a great time like this. Businesses, especially small businesses, are definitely facing very trying times. And good thinking and excellent execution is what will get all of us out of this. Now, the type of plans that businesses need to be making would range from, first of all, communication plan. How are you going to communicate the impact of COVID-19 on your business and, of course, by extension, on your clients and stakeholders, to all the stakeholders? Then you go into the details of business continuity plan. So how are you mitigating that impact? And what alternative ways are you going to use to then approach and serve your clients? So clients need to know how this COVID-19 will affect how you ordinarily serve them, and what are you going to be doing differently to ensure that you can continue to serve them. And obviously, you need to also have internally a cash flow management plan, because one of the greatest challenges of a time like this is the inflows are drying up, and yet your obligations and your commitments are consistent. So you need to have a very well thought out cash flow management plan. It may include also deferring some of those obligations, engaging with your counterparties for how to defer them. And of course, that may take you into what I would call a debt restructuring plan, or that is if you are carrying debt. So those are some of the plans you need to make. You need to have new plans for HR. So how are your people going to operate during the lockdown, after the lockdown, and then how do you proceed in the post-COVID period? So cost optimization, personnel optimization, resources optimization, perhaps space optimization, and of course, what I call a bounce back plan. Are there opportunities for you as a business that you can pivot to other lines where you were not actually in business right now? You've seen some people pivoting into making masks from fashion, pivoting into making hand sanitizers from maybe perfumes or from alcohol companies. So those are some of the things you're going to look at. So what's your bounce back? What are the opportunities you can take at this time? And ultimately in the post-COVID period, what is your bounce back plan? Don't forget also, what are your security and control plans that you're going to put in place, cyber security and physical security as well. Those are some of the planning that companies need to be thinking of right now and putting in place.
Thank you very much, ma'am. You've spoken about communication, cash flow management, human resource management, resource optimization, and the bounce back plan. So quickly, I would like to ask, and now this is directed to all the panelists. We would each have 2 minutes to respond to this. In dealing with contractual obligations to employees, many businesses are having to consider, many difficult options at this period to overcome financial difficulty. Some have had to consider redundancy, some have had to consider pay cuts, some have even had to consider termination of a very large number of their employee or their personnel. So my question to all the panelists is, what is the ideal approach for dealing with human capital in this period? Do we save businesses or do we save people? Or is there a middle of the way approach to this? So I think I'll start with Mr. Lanre Shotunde, and then each of these can have a 2-minute go at this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tosin. Thank you very much, Tosin. Dealing with this kind of situation, though it's a challenging situation, but from experience, we know that you can't go into redundancy. So all you have to do with the HR is probably to let them understand the reality of COVID, is to let them understand that, yes, we have a whole lot of issues ahead of us. We need to just probably try and cut our salary, maybe 50%, because it's better to retain your staff than for you to let them go, because getting them back after COVID might be very tough. Then at the end of the day, you might even look at getting other things through to them. You have to increase your infrastructure, that's your e-channels. You have to look at how you can work from home. You have to let them know that, look, this issue is a global pandemic, and what we can do going forward is just for you to stay afloat. So in this instance, what we can do is we'll reduce your salary gradually. We'll give you some benefits if we need it. Then you have to look at their emotional intelligence. You need to call them, let them know that you're supporting them. It's a very tough time. You talk to their emotions, you let them know they're part of the team. And at the end of the day, if everything goes well, we'll all be there to enjoy the benefit. So that's
so I suppose that you are pro-team in this conversation. Yeah. Dr. Nevin?
Saying, I mean, Tosin and Dr. Ogo said this is unprecedented times. The level of economic destruction is something that I hope none of us ever see again in our lifetime. I mean, to put some numbers on this, the government's expecting minus 35% GDP contraction in the UK. Australia's projecting 10% contraction the first half of the year. They've never had a recession in our lifetime. In the EU, they're expecting 8% contraction for all of 2020. These are numbers that are bigger than the Great Depression. Of course, in Africa, we're not immune to this. I mean, the World Bank is projecting 2 to 5% shrinkage, which is massive for us given the population growth. And all of these projections have proven to be understated, given the way that the strategy for COVID is taken in terms of these lockdowns. Because at the end of the day, your spending is someone else's income. And the one thing that has happened out of this is everyone in the world is an epidemiologist and everyone in the world is an economist. So I think that Lanre is exactly right. From an individual company viewpoint, you have no choice. You need to communicate, you need what you need to do to survive, but there's no simple solution. Obviously, if your income drops by 50%, 75%, 100%, and you have obligations, you need to react somehow. But in terms of refloating, and we'll probably talk later about this, the only solution to refloating the economy is something for the economy as a whole. No individual company can solve what is effectively a global depression. And some people in Nigeria are asking, are we in a recession or will we go into recession? I think the answer to that is we're in a recession. The only issue is are we going to go into a depression?
Okay. Thank you very much, Andrew. Nkem?
Thank you very much, Tosin. So I am also pro team, and for me, it's really about figuring out, number one, how to communicate the current situation to your team, ensuring that they also are, equipped with the right tools to manage their mental health. This is also a very scary time for employees. So I think we also need to sort of look at that. How can we keep them engaged? How do we keep certain things like TGIF or trainings going? So that's one of the things we've been doing. We have our bi-weekly in-house trainings. We've been doing TGIF on House Party, just to keep that bond going, right? And I think that another thing that, is really important is also to engage the team, and see how the team can help with creating new ideas and new products, and really, brainstorming and being very creative, because I believe that there are products that your company offers that you probably have not really thought about, or that you usually would maybe say, no, I don't really deal in that, but that you can deliver, right? And this is the time to actually go back to the drawing board and say, what can we deliver that will add value and will put money in the bank, even if it is outside of our usual service offering? And that's something that we've done, and we've been very successful with that. And we've actually seen a huge demand in certain services that we would normally not offer. And that is what we focused the entire April on. And because we focused on those new services, we're able to do payroll without any pay cuts, without any issues. And everybody in the team is really motivated because they feel that they were part of bringing this solution and ensuring that we got to that, win that we had at the end of April, and we will continue to push. So I think also ensuring that you are agile in your strategy and changing strategy very, very quickly, and involving your team in that strategy is really, really key, because sometimes you don't have all the answers, right? As a leader, you have all the pressure on your head. You probably have the smallest headspace to think, and they have a lot of headspace to think. So use your team, engage them, and see how they can actually help you reposition your company, offer new services, because this is really the time to pivot. This is the time to embrace change and really rethink your company completely.
Thank you so very much, Nkem. Thank you. Mr. Chiemeka. Are you pro team or pro business, or somewhere in between?
All right. Let me start by saying thank you to Business Day and the organizers for inviting us to this great session. Just like everyone else has said, this is something that we have not seen before. And so the idea definitely is to do both, to save the team as well as to save the business. But put it in perspective, I mean, the estimate, it's about 195 million jobs will be lost out of the 3.5 billion workforce globally. So definitely it's a health crisis at first, leading to economic crisis. So you will tend to see a lot of communication required, transparency in the manner in which companies operate, to make sure that everyone is carried along. And if for any reason, because it has to be dealt with on a business by business basis, for any reason, especially if you look at Nigeria, where a larger population of the workforce are housed by the small and medium scale industries, about 86%, they have less buffer to be able to deal with this. So there has to be transparency in the approach, and so that everyone knows essentially what the situation is. And even if people have to be laid off, it has to be done in a very transparent manner. But the idea would be to try and save both, because it's a health crisis. Definitely people will be affected. Some of the team members could be affected by the virus. We've seen recoveries. It's not a death sentence, but unfortunately some people have died from this. So it has to be managed in a way that post all of this, the business will still thrive.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Sani.
So I'm pro team in a pragmatic way. It's kind of like when you are on a plane and you are told to fasten your seatbelt, and that if you are in a crisis, that you should first attend to yourself before attending to your baby. If the business dies, all die. So even as we are being pro-team, there have to be pragmatic solutions. This could include redeployment, and of course, reskilling up, upskilling people. And one thing that I didn't mention in talking about the plans earlier is how very much everything you can do in this period and in the post-COVID period is going to depend on your digital skills, your capability for digital sales, digital marketing, digital sales, and delivery methods of business, e-commerce. So if you can engage your people and quickly turn around their skills to skills that will be more relevant in the post-COVID period and reassign them. Also solutions such as job sharing, home working, flexible working. Those are some of the things that, we have already engaged in my organization. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. I have a question around digital transformation. And there's so much being said about digital transformation of businesses. In fact, I think it's the most used business word in all of this period. And my question is directed at you, Nkem, because I know that you do practice in this space. And my question is digital transformation a bourgeoisie concept? Are all businesses capable of digital transformation? So can that woman who sells food items in the market digitally transform her business? Can an uneducated auto mechanic who works within our economy digitally transform his business? And are there any affordability concerns around digital transformation? Is it for everybody, and can everybody afford it? Okay.
Thank you, Tosin. So I would first of all like to say that, digital transformation is sort of a very wide term. But what it really speaks to is sort of the intersection of technology and human behavior, right? And that in itself means that really and truly every single business can digitally transform. How that looks like will be very, very different. And the type of methods that have to be put in place will be very different. To speak to, sort of the auto mechanic that you were talking about. So the Lagos State Employment Trust Fund actually launched a campaign to train vulcanizers on using tools like Google My Business so that they can set up, a location for where their vulcanizer shop is. They can put in their opening hours. They can put in additional information in terms of services that they offer. And, these are people who are also, very, very, not very literate, to put it like that, right? And that means that really and truly, if the right training is in place, this can actually be enabled for a lot of people, right? The women in the market as well. If you think about it, a lot of the time they have that are educated that can actually help them and step up in their business. And we've seen this in the lace trade, for example, that has actually gone online, and where there's been a lot of, with online customers and things like that through the children of the women who actually trade the lace, right? So, that is digital transformation in itself, right? Because it is basically optimizing your customer experience and optimizing your processes. Those are the two key pillars of digital transformation. And the third pillar is obviously upskilling your people, which Mrs. Sunny talked about. So I think that we just have to figure out the different levels of digital transformation that are tailored to every single business. Digital transformation is not a one-size-fits-all solution, right? There are different levels, and there are a lot of free tools like Google My Business, WhatsApp, that can actually digitally transform your business. So for example, if you were a fashion business or a tailoring business, you could communicate with your vendors using WhatsApp without actually any additional cost apart from the data that you probably already buy anyways, right? This then saves you transportation costs. It saves you, your people going out there. So there are many, many ways to actually automate your processes using free tools. So I don't really think that it is only for big businesses or the large corporates. I think that every business can be creative in how they actually infuse digital into their businesses. Now, in terms of, how big businesses approach this, they obviously have many, many more customer touch points, and they really need to look at all of their customer experience touch points. They need to look at all of their business operations and processes, and use those business operations and processes and figure out a strategy that will actually drive this, right? So for bigger businesses, it's actually much more complicated than for a small business because they have many more processes, they have many more customer touch points. So it's really, really important to actually have a strategy that drives digital transformation. And it's important that leadership actually understands digital transformation to the point that they need to understand it, right? So the vulcanizer needs to understand the basics of, if I put my business online, more people will come to me. The big business needs to understand much more, right? So as a CEO of a larger business, you have to actually have a much more in-depth understanding of what digital transformation is and what it means for your business and how to deploy it. You cannot leave it to your CIO, right? This is not just for the IT team. Digital transformation is not an IT project, right? It is a business strategy. So I think we need to just be really, really clear on what digital transformation actually means for the different types of businesses.
Thank you so much, Nkem. I'm not going to let you go so quickly yet. For the benefit of the audience, can you tell us quickly some of those quick transformation hacks that you think that every business is capable of deploying? And I know you spoke about some free tools before. Can you just tell us, one or two of those tools that every business can actually immediately deploy? I'm sure a lot of the people in the audience will be happy to hear from you talk about this.
So I would like to say again that digital transformation is not necessarily about the technology. It's more about the strategy that you actually deploy. So the strategy is actually much more important than the tools, because if you talk about, let's say, document management, right? There are so many different tools. There's Dropbox, there's Google Drive, there's Box, there's, Microsoft SharePoint. There's so many different tools that you can deploy, some of them free, some of them at a very low cost, some of them at a higher cost. The key thing is to actually understand, what do I want for my business and how do I want to deploy these tools? I think the main thing, as I mentioned before, is really C-level understanding of what digital transformation is, right? And then looking at the customer journey. Right? Digital transformation really focuses on the customer journey. How do you currently engage your customers? Where is their friction? So for example, for a bank, if your customers are always frustrated of filling 5 million forms when they go into the branch, now they're not going into the branch. How do you deliver a more seamless experience on digital? Is that via your mobile app? Is that going to happen on your website? Is that going to happen on WhatsApp or on social media? Are you going to use a chatbot? There's so many different ways of delivering the same service, right? So in my mind, it's not about the tools. It is more about the actual strategy, right? And for, I think in order for C-level executives to really understand digital transformation, there is a book that I can recommend. It's called The Digital Transformation Playbook by David L. Rogers. He's a professor at Columbia University, and the book is very, very clear on the different pillars of digital transformation. It also has a lot of examples of how digital transformation, can really transform a business, and understanding that it is a business strategy as opposed to a set of technology tools. So I think we just need to be very careful when we sort of talk about what are the tools that people can deploy. A tool can be as basic as communicating on WhatsApp or using Zoom for your calls, right? Those are basic tools, but those tools don't make your strategy. So I think we really have to, especially at the level that this discussion is, C-level executives are here, board members are here in the audience, and it has to be very clear that it is a strategy. and you need to develop this strategy and then implement the strategy. Tools are, like sort of like sand on the beach. So that isn't really the problem, right? You will always find tools, and then you have to figure out what's the business case, what will help my organization. But the key thing is your strategy. Your strategy has to really, really be sound. And your strategy has to include change management. It has to include your people. It has to include business continuity. It has to include, cybersecurity, what Mrs. Sunny also spoke about. It has to include your customer experience. It has to include a competitive analysis. So there are so many different parts of, the strategy that need to be sort of done. That are really, really important before you even go into sort of deploying any of the tools. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nkem. Thank you. It is indeed, digital transformation is indeed a marathon and not a dash. And it's more about the strategy than the tools. Thank you so much for that. My next question I will direct to Mr. Chiemeka, and I think Nkem, I'm very certain that you would want to chip in as well. So many businesses are currently being forced to transform their business model, their processes, and their organizational structure. So what is the ideal way to upskill staff, especially in this period where everyone is working remotely? And how do we ensure that the older generation workforce, by that I mean the baby boomers and Generation X, are well integrated into this plan and this strategy? Mr. Chiemeka, over to you.
All right, thanks, Tosin. Leveraging on what Nkem said, clearly there's a digital strategy that businesses will need to adopt going forward. Remote access to their work tools. So they need to have a robust platform that allows them to even have that remote access to the work tools, like the servers at the various locations, to enable them have access to the sort of tools that they need for what they need to do. Having said that, the HR will have to make a deliberate effort in terms of trying to ensure that the skill set that are required for the emerging economy, as it were, are what they are focusing on. And so it will require a lot of online training courses just to ensure that the staff are carried along. They will need to redefine targets, especially around growth trajectory, moving from the normal growth in terms of the business growth, but also to impact their personal growth in terms of the skill set required to do the sort of work they need to do. The truth be told, we're all entering new territory. So businesses will no longer have to rely on past strategies or past competitive advantages that they've had in the past. So clearly we need to do more of focused training. Reports from Harvard does suggest that it's only 25% of trainings that people get that actually apply to their workforce, to the work that they do. So there's need to focus on that and ensure that the work and the training that people are getting, it's in line with what they really need to do. They also need to look at collaborative work across the teams. I think Mrs. Sonny mentioned something like that, that there's need to allow various departments to work collaboratively. So that way, in terms of skill sets, they will be able to build up and upgrade skills from that perspective. There's also the element of having access to latest best-in-class tools to ensure that the workforce are aware of latest trends and how they can use these tools in line with the proposed digital strategy to ensure that the business and their own contribution to the business continues to be top-notch. These are some of the ways that I think clearly the workforce would need to be upskilled to ensure that at the end of the day, the business is working in line with the target that I have set. There's also the element around constant check-ins. because people are working remotely. So you need to have access to be able to check that people are doing what it is that they're supposed to be doing and how they're supposed to be doing it. Perhaps we'll move away from the normal half-year evaluation to you go to a quarterly type of thing. There are weekly check-ins to ensure that people are essentially driving the business the way they should drive the business. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chiemeka. Nkem, I'm sure that you would want to chip in one or two things.
Yes, so I completely agree with Chiemeka, and I think that organizations really have to also rethink their learning and development strategies. What is my current state in terms of the skill level of my organization and the members of that organization, and what does the future state look like? Where do I want to go, right? What type of skills does my organization need in order to survive in the 21st century and make it through this recession/depression, right? And I think that once you actually have a proper learning and development strategy that you have to develop together with HR, but also with the managers. What we're seeing more and more is direct engagement of managers of line managers in learning and development strategies, because the line managers actually have a much better oversight of skills gaps and they can assign courses very quickly. Now, obviously, one of the great ways of doing it is having an in-house learning management system. This could be Coursera, it could be LinkedIn Learning, it could be Udemy for Business, it could be Go On. There are so many different options for different sizes of businesses that have pricing that sort of fit small businesses, medium businesses, large businesses. And those platforms have learning material and courses on there that basically have a lot of these 21st century and digital skills integrated into them. So you can just assign them to your team members, and the team members can then basically do the courses at their own time. You integrate that into your performance management. So it's really important to actually have an approach that is fully integrated into your performance management and integrated into your learning and development strategy in order to actually see results, and also to understand, once you do that gap analysis of present state and future state, you can then also see what are the human resource gaps that I need to fill, where I need to hire someone new, right? Not everybody can be reskilled. Certain positions require experience, and you cannot hire or train, you cannot train experience and only hire it, right? So it's really important to also be, sort of open to hiring new people. And sometimes it also means that you have to let people go who are not really, able to upskill, because you can give people, as they say, you can take a horse to the stream, but you cannot force the horse to drink. So there will be people in your organization that will kick against these changes because they're just not ready to actually embrace them. And then you need to figure out what you do with those people. So you also have to be ready to sort of phase out some of your staff that you currently have. And this is usually very pertinent in large organizations and corporates where you have staff that have been with the organization 10 or more years and have simply been doing a similar job for that time, and have not necessarily grown the way that they should have grown, and who are not ready to actually embrace change and embrace the new ways of doing things. So those staff, you have to figure out, how do you phase them out if there's no other way to sort of put them in a different position that they can continue to do. The truth is that everything is going digital, so we really do not have a choice. Another thing that I think is important is also to communicate to your staff that their professional development is something that is really their personal, they have to own it, right? They have to make sure that they are in charge of their personal development. So you can provide the tools, but they need to make sure that they can actually do their job. And we're seeing this more and more when we, talk about the future of work. We're seeing where self-driven professional development is coming at the forefront, and the organization simply lays a foundation and gives the tools, as opposed to the organization having to necessarily lead on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nkem. I think at this point, I'm about to wrap up the first session where we're talking about the future of work. And so my question now is to all the panelists. We will take 2 minutes each to give our opinion on this. When all of this is finally over, we've been told to expect radical shifts in employee expectations, in labor dynamics, and in technology and work tools. So what kind of workplace will we be expecting to go back to? What changes should we expect? And what will be the new normal? I will start with Mrs. Sani. What will be the new normal?
Yeah, thank you, Tosi. So what I'm going to do is I'm essentially going to share what we have decided to do in my organization. And some of them are radical stuff. So I think it may be a pointer to what will be the new norm. So what will be the new normal for us, for example, is that currently we occupy 2 buildings in our head office, and we're giving up one of the buildings. What the building that we're giving up includes the building where my office is. And for me, my attitude is, if I cut my office and I go to a smaller office in the rear building, everybody gets the message that it's not business as usual. So that's the whole idea. It's not business as usual. Half of our staff will be working either from home or flexible, just coming in like 2 times a week. All our meetings any meeting that we initiate will be done electronically via Zoom or other online means. And if we are invited to a meeting, those are policy decisions we've taken in the foreseeable future. If we're invited to a meeting and we have the option of joining online, that's what we will choose as an organization. Physical meetings will be brought to the minimum, not just because of cost, but because of safety concerns as well. And we would only take physical meetings where we think it is important for either new client acquisition or existing clients relationship management. All the other execution type meetings, we will do them electronically. And now we also have decided on all the security measures, which we implemented, of course, before even the lockdown. So I'm sure the new normal includes everybody will get used to all kinds of screening before you can get into premises, because we all want to be sure that our clients are safe and our staff are safe as well. The new normal for us also means that travel, it becomes something that is exceptional as opposed to something that is routine. The new normal for us also means that we typically have 4 board meetings. We have 4 boards and we have 4 board meetings in a year. So that's 16 meetings in a year. And the new normal means that about 3/4, 75% of those meetings are going to be virtual meetings, and only 25%, which is the annual board training, will now be board training and strategy session will now be the physical one. And even then we would observe social distancing and all that. For me, I know that COVID-19 will end. I have no doubt that there will come a time when the scare is over. But I think that the extent of the shock that we have all absorbed and how far this has gone should make all of us know that we should not just go back to the old ways of doing business. We should assume that this kind of things will happen from time to time, and we should be ready in the way we operate. Of course, the new normal also means that the aviation industry and the recreation, hotels, entertainment industries, I don't think those industries can continue in their current format, and a lot of rethinking will have to be done. So those are some of my thoughts about what will be the new normal. So
thank you, ma'am.
Sharing and all that stuff as well. Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Chiemeka, I apologize, I may not be able to take all the panelists on this round, but Mr. Chiemeka, please, what are your thoughts around the question?
Okay. So clearly, a lot of conversation before this period around digital technology, the digital economy, before this COVID crisis started. So this just jumpstarts the whole process. Okay, so we're going to see a lot of changes even in the way we approach the digital transformation. A lot of firms will be making a lot of investment in tools that will allow their businesses to be positioned to take advantage of emerging ways of solving problems. It's a strategic thing, and we're going to see a lot of strategic shifts, especially in solving the problem or the needs of the customer journey. So it's no longer about satisfaction of the customer, but actually trying to solve the problem digitally, which will require some set of tools to be able to do that in a very timely fashion. We're also going to see become more digitalized. We begin to face another set of threats. And so businesses are going to be making huge investments around cybersecurity to ensure that their businesses are clearly protected with the right technologies. We'll also see situations where, to a large extent, the needs, the individual needs of the businesses will have to change, such that clearly, I think it was said earlier, some people who do not have the ability to transform into this new way of addressing customer needs will have to be let go, while we focus on retooling and reskilling a lot of internal processes. So there will be a change even in internal processes of businesses. It's not about automation of the manual approach, but it's about using digital strategy to address the needs of the customer. I think that's going to be the new norm. We're going to see a lot of that in the coming weeks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chiemeka. Andrew, I'm sure that you want to add your voice to this conversation.
No, I
about the
think
new normal.
Yeah, no, I think fellow panelists have said it well. I think the issue, though, is it varies very much by industry. So if we look at what's happened in Nigeria since the onset of this crisis, I think industries like professional services, like PwC, and industries like financial services, particularly the banks, have done relatively well in moving to this new way of working. But there's still a physical world out there. Goods need to be moved. Food needs to be produced, it needs to be moved. People need to live in houses. Houses need to be constructed. Things need to be manufactured. The port needs to function. So I think that there are certain workers and certain organizations where you're going to have a completely new way of working. And as Toyin said, we're in the same situation. We're not going to travel unless it's necessary. Airlines are going to have to be restructured, hotels. But I wouldn't overestimate it for the entire economy. Obviously, everyone should be thinking about digital, but there's still, as I said, a physical world out there that we need to think about. And that makes it more complex. In many ways, I think professional services firms and the banks have done, I don't say well, but relatively well in operating in this crisis compared to the more physical firms.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for that, that insight. So now we're going to be going into the second session where we'll be talking about the emerging realities on the Nigerian economy and the way to map the road to sustenance and recovery. Before I do that, let me just quickly announce that we have poll questions that will be displayed on all the platforms where the webinar is being viewed. And I encourage all participants to please help to answer the poll questions. We would display the results before the end of the session. Thank you very much. So to set a background to the next session, I think it's important, to state that Nigeria is sluggishly recovering from the 2016 economic recession. Yet again, we're having to deal with so much at this time. The budget for 2020 fiscal year has seen all its underlying assumptions being completely eroded. The IMF has recently downgraded its growth projection for Nigeria. Our foreign reserves are shrinking, and unemployment, poverty, and inflation are growing astronomically. So, Dr. Andrew Nevin, is Nigeria in a recession, or are we going to slide into a recession? And what kind of fiscal and monetary policy responses do you think we should be exploring to best cushion our already fragile economy?
Thank you. Let me start by, yes, we are in a recession. So what is a recession? A recession technically is 2 quarters of negative growth. It is a certainty that we're going to have 2 quarters of negative growth. As I said before, the issue is, are we in a depression? I mean, let's not sugarcoat at all the situation we're in. So we look at, I talked before about the global collapse in demand. Everyone's spending as someone else's income. People are locked down around the world. I think some 2 billion people. I mean, we're in theory supposed to come out of that slowly in different places. We'll see how successful that is from a health viewpoint. And in Nigeria, we've had a few weeks of lockdown. It's made us all realize that we have at least 50 to 70% of employment are day laborers, day wages. If they don't work, they don't eat. So in terms of where we're at, and then we need to combine this with what's happened in the oil market. So 35 million barrels of oil right now is not being used a day. So 100 million barrels of oil is normally used a day. So the price has collapsed. And as we were discussing earlier, it's not like this price is going to necessarily come back quickly, because people have new ways of working. They're not going to fly as much. They're not going to continue to work as much. So we should expect a long period of low oil prices. Now, of course, where we're at in oil prices today is lower than the production costs in Nigeria, which essentially means there's virtually no revenue flowing to the Federation account, which means that we have the incredible fiscal stress of the federal government. But at the state level, where often the Federation, the allocation is 90% of the total revenue, you effectively have many, many states insolvent. So we're facing a great crisis. That said, the starting point for this crisis, of course, right now where we're at, we've been very clear for 6 or 7 weeks, I believe, on this. There's two things that are critical. The first thing is to get resources into the hands of the bottom of the pyramid. And the people who are the daily wage earners, who are not earning a wage, they need to have resources. Particularly, they need to have food. The second issue, of course, is that we need the food supply chain to work. Because one of the things that's happening with these lockdowns, of course, is we disrupt the supply chain. We've all heard stories in the media about the police forces essentially using this as an opportunity for extortion along the routes, driving up the price of food. But those are the two critical things to focus on in the short term: getting resources at the bottom of the pyramid and keeping the food supply chains working.
Dr. Nevin. My next question would be about government's approach, and I'm seeing a lot of comments here that are, directed towards government's approach. And so my question is directed to Mr. Chiemeka, and I think I would also let Mrs. Sani put in, provide her own input to this. How should governments approach the issue of stimulus and bailout for the hardest hit industries and, of course, small businesses? Who should the government's attention be on at this time, and how should the government approach this stimulus and bailout?
Thank you, Tosin. The thing is, this is a global phenomenon. So, so in terms of intervention, it has to be perceived from that perspective. So it will not be trying to focus on one and leaving the other. It has to be a combination of everything. Okay, so if you look at the current intervention the government is doing, which is great in terms of the 3.5 trillion loans for businesses, and also the CBN intervention, cutting the rates for all the various interventions that have been doing from 9 to 5%, and the 500 billion naira made available largely around the healthcare refurbishment. So these are great methodologies that I think should be encouraged, but clearly, just like Dr. Andrew said, government themselves are challenged in terms of revenues. Because if you look at our revenue profile, 90% of our foreign earnings is from sale of crude oil. 70% of our total government revenues come from the same sale of crude oil. And what has happened to the price is collapsed. I think it's about $21 at the moment. Our budget was initially based on $57 per barrel. They call it to $30 a barrel. And so government cannot do this on their own, but the intervention has to be looked at from the monetary, the physical, as well as the infrastructural policies that they have to come up with to ensure that there's an enablement for all the sectors of the economy. And so the trick to this is greater collaboration with the private sector. There's a need for the private sector to be involved in what government is doing to ensure that the businesses are carried along and to also to ensure that the viability, because these businesses employ people, and people to a large extent is the concern of the government in terms of the security or the growth of insecurity you're seeing in the economy has to be addressed. So intervention has to be holistic to ensure that the hardest hit industries are giving palliatives. We're talking about tax rebates, tax holidays, ensuring that people have access to government induced sort of incentives to allow them to raise capital. If you're looking at it from the capital market perspective, I mean, our recommendation would be government would definitely have to have a sort of form of bailout fund that will allow them to buy all these instruments, because these companies will definitely need capital to restart what they're doing. And to be able to do this, they need to raise bonds, and government should be ready to buy these bonds, just like I've seen in other international markets, to provide a much needed liquidity. These companies have to be allowed to operate and operate because they need to hire people, and they need people to be fed, and for the government to have that ability to provide for the needs of the people. And so that is one way we think that the approach of the government should be. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chemeka. Mrs. Sani, please.
Okay, so I'm totally aligned with Jude. I would just add that also a more realistic foreign exchange policy will hopefully help to encourage exportation. Secondly, I also think that the government should be wary of cash distribution to people at a time when we're encouraging financial inclusion, and rather look at how to channel that cash through, intermediaries that are well structured and registered and known to government. So the microfinance institutions, the commercial banks in the neighborhoods where these people have accounts, so that there's also some transparency along the lines of these interventions. So those are some of the things that I think, and definitely I support the channeling of single-digit funding to SMEs, again, through CBN registered and SEC registered managers and venture capital entities, and through CBN registered entities. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to take you on my next question, and so I'm not letting you go just yet. So we've spoken about companies. I think that a lot of people have shown great disappointment at the country's lack of coordination in implementing the several social welfare interventions that we have seen government initiate to cushion the impacts of the pandemic. And my question is a data-driven intervention impossible? Mrs. Sani.
Sorry, I didn't know that was for me. Okay, so I don't think a data-driven intervention is impossible. And I think at the least we can do some of this and some of that. So first of all, in the parts of the country where we clearly have the data, we have BVNs and people have accounts, that should be our primary and chosen preferred method of intervention. And then where we say that there is totally no data and we have to intervene manually, then we will do it in a limited fashion and still ensure that there are records and there's total transparency.
Whether Mr. Shotunde would like to just add.
Well, I think I want to support what Mrs. Sonia said. That I think all we're going to do, we just need to look at the digital channels. Let's see what exactly we can help do in that instance, because doing every other thing might not work because of the health implications. So if we're able to work with the digital channels, we're able to reach out to our customers, we're able to do one or two things, trying to talk to our customers and improve our services, we should be able to get things done, pending when COVID goes off. Thank you.
Mr. Shotunde, thank you very much. I'll just go right straight into my next question. And this is directed to Mr. Chiemeka. Economists across the world are projecting devastating effects of the pandemic on the world economy, especially the financial markets. What is the Nigerian Stock Exchange doing to keep the market afloat? And how is the boss responding to the significant loss of foreign portfolio investments in the face of looming FX risk? Mr. Chiemeka.
All right, thank you, Tosin. NSC, we're doing quite a lot, to be honest. But I'll just focus on the key things. Following the nationwide lockdown, we activated our business continuity plan. Now that business continuity plan ensured that we're able to grant brokers access to trade via fixed protocol, as well as VPN. And the VPN, virtual private network, was done at pro bono to our community as part of our palliative to help support the brokers to ensure that trading continued at normal trading hours. They need access to liquidity. We also published our guidance on virtual meetings. This is supposed to facilitate meetings, board meetings, committee meetings, to ensure that businesses are able to continue and meet the obligation of their customers as well as their shareholders. We're also very strong in the area of virtual AGMs. We played a very key role in ensuring that we're able to get the AGMs to be done virtually, to allow the corporates to be able to pay dividend to investors. Obviously, investors will need liquidity at this particular time. The NSC continues to be very vocal. We're very much involved in all the work that went on to ensure that the financial services were included as the critical sector to ensure that liquidity continues to flow in the overall economy. Part of the work we have also done in the area of regulation is to just allow companies, giving them some leeway to be able to delay their filings, just to ensure that they're able to solve all their problems and deal with this issue that we're all confronted with in a manner that will not disrupt their business processes. On the support from our community, we did have a virtual closing gong, which was hosted by the CEO of the Stock Exchange, just to appreciate all the listed companies for all the various contributions they have made, which was very significant in terms to in helping to address some of the issues confronting the nation in terms of medical supplies, in terms of food and beverages, to ensure that the disruption is not too difficult for the general population. One of the things that we're also involved in is we're part of the committee set up by the SEC, the Committee for Capital Market COVID Response, and that gives us the ability to also continue to participate in ensuring that we provide the much needed intervention as well. As you know, the SEC is galvanizing the capital market community to raise £1 billion, which will be used to address some of the issues that we're seeing. Like I said initially, government cannot do this alone, and there's need to work with the private sector to continue to ensure that the impact is not greatly felt in the larger economies. I'll leave it at that at this particular time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chiemeka. We're gradually running, into the final minutes of the session, so I'm going to move a little bit faster than we have been going. And so the next question I would like us to ponder on is whether there is a positive, side to this pandemic. And I say this because, this pandemic seems to have severely impaired the mobility of essential goods and commodities. especially for Nigeria, that is a heavily import-dependent country. However, we seem to be seeing a lot of local manufacturers who have risen to the occasion, and we now have recorded significant spike in the production of, for instance, medical supplies. We have local manufacturers now who are producing hand sanitizers, locally produced masks, and other, parts of the personal protective equipment that the frontliners are using. Could there be a positive twist in response to the shrinking of our global supply chains? Do we see local manufacturing and production finally getting the desired boost in this period? I will let Mrs. Sani make a go, and then Mr. Shotunde can give his own inputs to this. Mrs. Sani.
Okay, so the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the fault lines in global supply chains and the risk of over-dependence on places like China, for example, as a source for Nigeria, a lot of our pharmaceutical drugs and equipments, and also for production tools and inputs for the manufacturing industry. And clearly it has brought an opportunity. An opportunity definitely exists for Nigerian companies to fill this gap. And we are seeing companies beginning to pivot in that direction to succeed. And by the way, the opportunities exist both for raw materials, for production, and also for finished goods for consumption. To succeed, we need a strong pro-Nigeria, pro-Buy Nigeria, Invest Nigeria campaign by all segments of the economy. We also need fiscal stimulus, such as specific tax waivers and reliefs for critical sectors to our recovery, such as healthcare, pharmaceuticals, agriculture. And of course, it will be important for these kind of reliefs to not just to be for existing players, but also reliefs that will reward additional investments in this space. And of course, we will need a policy framework that supports investment in infrastructure. If we can do all this, I align with what Jude said earlier. I think government needs to gather together current and prospective investors in some of these spaces and essentially ask them what would it take for you to put more money into this space. Take their feedback, go back and decide what government can do and what government cannot do, and then let's see the way forward. But definitely a clear opportunity exists, not just to manufacture for local consumption, but possibly for export across the continent, especially in the spirit of ACTA.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Sani. Mr. Shotunde, please.
Yes.
What are your thoughts around the question?
Yes, thank you very much, Tosin. I think the first thing the government has done is to help give out stimulus in the area of credit. They've been able to introduce intervention funds. They've been able to talk to the people, tell the people that, look, you can harness funds from the banks, intervention funds at 3 to 5%. And by 2021, it might increase to 9%. They are trying to grow the SME industry. They're trying to let people understand that, look, access to credit is easy. Now, what are we going to do going forward? The legislative arm of the government has told the government that, look, let us suspend import duties on medical facilities. Let us protect employees, try and reduce their income tax by 50%, introduce new moratorium on mortgages, so that all those things can help to alleviate the problem. So we can now look into this and see how we can work out a lot of things. The tax timeline for tax remittance has been reduced. They've done a lot of electronic devices to just help us send our returns. So in all this, government has looked at some areas of palliative to us. So if the industries can work on this, I'm sure get credit, start production, then we might just look at internal production, and at the end of the day, we might start exporting. So beyond the challenges of COVID, we can see that there are some other attributes that we can walk into. We've seen how a lot of people have really adopted the digital channels. We can see how people are working from home. Banks have developed infrastructure. So in this wise, software development too it's something to look at. So I really believe there are other benefits we can get from this, though the challenges are numerous, but we can look at other things. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shotunde, for that contribution. Dr. Nevin, a lot of people have questions for you on the live chat. I'm just going to get onto one of them, which I think so many people have been clamoring. So one of the things that seems the biggest challenge to businesses in this period, particularly businesses that have to do a lot of import of input for production, has been foreign exchange. A lot of people have found it exceptionally difficult to access the foreign exchange market. Everybody seems to be looking for USD, to make it a bit more precise. We are hearing about rate convergence, about rate adjustments, and some of the many people out there just don't even understand what the foreign exchange regime is right now. What are the fundamentals of this new FX regime, and how can local businesses position in the light of unavailability and inconsistency of foreign exchange rates? Dr. Nevin?
Well, I'm sorry, I don't have any magic bullet here. I mean, let's be honest, what's happened over the last 7 or 8 years. I mean, we had very high oil prices prior to 2015. We didn't make any progress on diversification, any progress on ease of doing business. Starting in 2015, we were forced into it. We had the recession in 2016. But again, the progress has been very slow. So we still are overly reliant, as said, on the oil as a source of foreign exchange, and that source has effectively gone to zero for the country. I mean, the only reason we're not totally insolvent, to be honest, is that actually the remittances from the diaspora are a bigger source of FX for the country. But those are projected by the World Bank to decline by about 25% for sub-Saharan Africa. So there's no easy answer. I mean, we've advocated, as many others, for a convergence of the exchange rates for a long time. That's essentially being forced. I mean, many of the things that people have said would unlock the Nigerian economy, now be no choice for the government. So that includes issues around the ease of doing business. I mean, we were talking about increasing exports, reducing imports of medical equipment. A lot of that is tied again to the ease of doing business, to the poor infrastructure, and particularly to the power problem, which has not been solved. But I think that the only solution for the country, I mean, right now we only get about half of the investment that's required. And as long as we only get half, the country can only grow at 2%. This year, it's going to shrink significantly. So to grow at the 6 to 8% that we've advocated for a long time needs at least a doubling of investment. So people, Nigerians, diaspora, and people, outsiders, all want to invest in Nigeria. So the fundamental question I would put, and Mrs. Sandy put it very well, is the government needs to answer the question: why do people not invest in Nigeria? And how can we, as we come out of this crisis, create an environment where people will invest? Because if there isn't a massive increase of investment in Nigeria coming out of the crisis, there is no silver lining.
Very much, Dr. Nevin. Mr. Shotunde, your business is heavily reliant on foreign exchange. Can you tell us a bit about the experiences that you've had in recent times and what you are suggesting that government do to mitigate the challenges that businesses such as yours are having in terms of, inability to source foreign exchange, to import for your kind of business?
Thank you very much. We operate in the oil and gas midstream. And in this instance, you and I know that it's been very tough because COVID has really made oil prices go down. The proceeds from export has gone down drastically as the budget in January was about $57 per barrel. As we speak today, for the Brent is about $24. And that shows that we've lost a lot of income in that wise. And income and FX distribution, they go together. The more income we have from FX proceeds, the more we can distribute to people. So, but in this instance, no matter what challenges we're facing, we've been able to, bring up a lot of other solutions to it. The first one is for us really, because we have different exchange rates. There's no uniform exchange rate. The exchange rate for aviation is different from that of other industries. So what we've decided to do is just to look at our exchange rate, look at the I&E window, that's the investment and export window, which as of last week was floating at about 388 naira to a dollar. Then we look at the blend with our retail. Then we have the parallel market, which as of last week was about 420, 450. So at the end of the day, we try to harness as much as we can from all this market so that before we know it, we have a final average of less than maybe 390, 400. But then in looking at it, we know that there are a lot of challenges for the government as well, because we learned that our total position as per the external reserves fell by 0.1% to 30.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shotunde. I'm going to throw this question open to
that can do,
okay.
that can, you know, that are.
Mr. Shotunde is back.
Can you hear me, sir? Can you hear me, madam?
Yes, we can now. You went off for a bit. Please go ahead, sir. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I said government should look at essential businesses that are essential to the people and lend to them, so that by the time they streamline that, we would have enough funds to bring in products that are meaningful to the people. Though COVID has really, really reduced the what's it called, the demand for our petroleum products. I mean, the PMS and the AGO, but then we'll still need to make imports so that the states that don't have the lockdown, they can benefit from this and help NNPC. We can help NNPC, you know, do their distribution. So it's been very.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shotunde. I think I would just like Mrs. Sani to make an input to the question.
Strategies that we've used in getting our effects. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shotunde. Thank you very much. So we are gradually again getting to the end of the session, and I would want to take our very last question before we open up, you know, the panel to questions from participants across the platforms where the webinar is being viewed. To all the panelists, I would like to have your input on these questions. What were the key lessons learned from the 2008 global recession? How is the current situation different from the 2008 scenario, especially for Nigeria? And how do we map a homegrown solution that would lead to the path of sustenance and recovery? I would let Andrew go first.
Thank you so much. So let me start out by saying, I don't think we learned very many lessons from the global financial crisis. I'm speaking from a global perspective, not Nigeria. I'll come to it in a moment. I mean, you think about the response to it. So we had reckless bankers, reckless financiers. The response in 2008, 2009 was effectively to bail out most of these people. As far as I know, only 2 people went to jail in the United States, no one in the United Kingdom. And we then adopted unorthodox monetary policies that essentially, I'll be very blunt about it, are theft from the bottom of the pyramid, moving money to the top 1% to the top 0.1%. So the 0% interest, the asset inflation bubble, et cetera. And of course, as a result too, during this whole decade after the crisis, we've ended up creating larger debt pile than we had that led to the crisis in the first place. I think in Nigeria, I mean, what brought me to Nigeria was working with the Governor Sanusi at the central bank. I think he did an excellent job of dealing with the fallout in Nigeria and the taking over the banks and restructuring the system and having rules that are put in place for a much stronger banking system on that. I think as we come into this crisis, again, I'll give a little bit of a global view. Other panelists can talk about Nigeria, but we're seeing somewhat of a repeat of bailing out the top of the pyramid. Certainly, if you look at the United States, you've had a further expansion of the Fed balance sheet by up to 4 trillion potentially through this crisis. Maybe it will be more, which is extraordinary. But what is the most amazing is the Fed is now prepared to buy junk bonds. So they have defined, so what they're saying is if there was investment grade corporate paper that because of the crisis, say in the oil industry and the price of oil dropped, it's now dropped into junk status. Rather than let the markets sort it out, the Fed is prepared to buy the assets. So this expansion of the central bank balance sheets around the world, I think, is very worrying. The one thing I'll say, though, is positive about this crisis versus the last one. At least there's a recognition there also needs to be support for the average person around the world. We've talked about it in the Nigerian context. You see other programs there, but there's still too much of the bailout resources going to the top of the pyramid and to the financial class.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Nkem Rego, do you want to give us your input in 2 minutes, please?
Yes, sure. So I think that the situation is actually a little bit different than in 2008. And the reason why I say this is because technology was not as advanced as it is today. So I actually think that we have the opportunity to use technology as a springboard, especially as African countries, and use that to focus on value creation. I also think that this is the opportunity for us to heavily invest in human capital so that we can reduce the dependency on foreign human capital. And we're actually seeing that we will be forced into this. So for example, a lot of technology vendors that are global vendors that service banks, telcos, and so on, currently, because of the travel ban, cannot come into Nigeria. So what does that mean? Are we going to wait for travel bans to be lifted? No one knows when that is. Or are we going to actually start investing in our own human capital so that these jobs can actually be given to local vendors that have the right capabilities? So I think it is really a point where we need to deeply reflect as a nation. And as Mrs. Sunny had earlier said, also wear our patriotic hat and come together and solve these issues that we are currently facing as a collective. I don't think that government alone can solve this. I don't think the private sector alone can solve this. I think it has to be in a collaborative manner. And I think that we all have to really look at how do we become less globally dependent, whether it is FX dependency or human capital dependency or product dependency. We really, really have to look at what are the key strategies that we have to develop to invest in those sectors that can really cut off those dependencies in a long-term manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Nkem. Mr. Chumeka, please.
Okay, thank you, Tosin. Just to address the issue, this is quite different from 2008 global financial crisis, which was more of a demand shock that later led to a supply shock. Okay, so where are we as a nation, or where were we then? We had about $52 billion as reserve. Inflation was 11.5, and we had some decent inflows in our excess crude account. But where are we? Where are we today? Inflation is at 12.2, and we have less than $25 billion in our less than $35 billion in our foreign reserve. And so this is a massive earthquake, for lack of a better word. And so it's not to be dealt with the way we handle the financial crisis. So that is how it's different. So what do we do to map out the homegrown solution to this crisis? I think we have to start with the health sector. Health, they say, is wealth. Just given what has happened, the former notion that you could travel abroad for medical treatment does not exist today. So we need to do something about our medical or our healthcare system. So that is one. Two, we need to support the vulnerable subnationals, states that are not viable enough to pay salaries. Government will need to intervene to make sure that people are paid and the insecurity does not continue to grow. Palliatives and incentives will have to be given out. The direct cash payment that they're doing should continue. Palliatives around the support should continue. And then support for the capital market. Clearly, there's need to support the capital market. The capital market can be used as a platform to help government raise bigger capital to be able to address some of the gaps in their budget. Domestically, we'll have to rely less on international play. Today, our market is 50-50. We have 50 international, 50 domestic. Ideally, it should be 70-30. So we should have more domestic participation on our market. At the NSC, we've taken initiative to create a new retail investor coverage to just help drive retail investor participation on our market. So there has to be a concerted effort to ensure that we have a deep capital market that is supported by domestic investor base, so that when we have such shocks, it doesn't have devastating effect. Don't forget that a large portion of the pension fund are invested even in the market. So you don't want pensioners also to lose their pension in the course of all this crisis. I think it's clear that it has to be collaborative between the states, the national, as well as the private sector, to ensure that whatever we're doing is holistic and everyone is carried along in a fair, transparent manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chiemeka. Let me kindly remind the panelists that we need to stick to the 2-minute timeline because we are almost completely out of time. I think we will stretch this for an additional 10 to 15 minutes just so we can accommodate questions. We have several questions that have come in through the online platforms. I probably would only be able to take about 3 or 4 of them. But now I would let Mrs. Sani make her contribution to the question.
Okay, so just 2 contributions on the lessons that I think we didn't learn from the last global financial crisis. The first lesson we didn't learn is that we didn't learn how important domestic capital is. We didn't remember that the first thing that flies out when there is a crisis is foreign capital. So the FDI reversals, the massive FDI reversals and FPI reversals that we saw in 2008, we have seen the same thing here, and we don't have any solution because we did not learn, we didn't build domestic saving, growth, domestic savings and domestic investments. And earlier this year, we actually had a class of asset that we precluded domestic investors from accessing. And now suddenly, again, we're back to these domestic investors that we thought were not important. Second thing that I think we didn't learn is we didn't learn to invest in our people. And no matter the nature of the problem, at the end of the day, people are the ones that solve the problem. People may deploy technology, but it will be somebody that would initiate the process. And if you look at what is happening with our medical, the resources, human we have with our medical personnel, we have gross undersupply. And because it's a global problem, everybody all over the world is using their own resources and they're not going to send theirs to ours. So you need to understand when there's a global problem, it is those whom you have within your market will solve it. I hope this time we'll invest heavily in our people.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Sani, for telling us the lessons we did not learn, which I think is even more important than the lessons that we learned. Thank you so much. Mr. Lanre Shotunde, please.
Thank you very much, Tosin. I think I want to go with what Mrs. Sonny said, but to add to that, the government can support by probably bringing up some expansionary fiscal policies. That's where you reduce your taxes so that you have more money in the hands of people. In so doing, the multiply effect will help the economy. In other words, we should also look at a bit of credit restrictions. The policies should be restricted so that looking inwards, we can always source funds. You have the cottage, the SMEs, you have a lot of businesses that need money to roll things. Yes, we've been able to highlight businesses that will thrive. We're looking at the health sector, pharmaceutical sector, logistics, and some other things. These are businesses that will take us to the promised land. So in that wise, once we've identified them, we should get banks to support them. So the government should do a lot of things to support credit disbursement to these sectors so that they can harness funds and do what they can do inwards. Like Mrs. Sonny said, we need to invest in people. Since the borders are closed, the foreigners can't come in. We don't have experts coming in, the people we have on ground should be trained. So the government should endeavor, probably collaborate with all other training institutes to upgrade our training programs so that we can have people in-house that will support our processes, that will support our businesses in the aspect of training. And lastly, I would like to look at, I would like to tell everyone that we need to do a bit of cleaning. When we say cleaning, we need to look at our businesses and look at leakages in the business.
Mr.
Because
Chisholm, just 30 more seconds, please, so we can move quickly to the questions.
And now, businesses need to be re-audited, policies need to be reshaped so that we have new policies that would include COVID and other risks. Risk management is very tough, but then we have to do all this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all our panelists for your insightful contribution. I would quickly run through a few questions. Unfortunately, we can't take all the many that we have, but I will try to take as few as we can accommodate. We are already completely stretched for time, and we need to wrap this up. First question I'll be taking is directed to Dr. Nevin. It says, with respect to how bad our budget for the year has been affected due to the unprecedented drop in oil price, what do you think about promoting the exportation of some non-essential agricultural produce? Such policies need to be revisited and legalized, such as the production of cannabis and medical research post COVID-19. That's what the question says.
Well, I think the export of agricultural products across the board should be encouraged. With respect to cannabis, of course, I'm Canadian citizen. It's legal in Canada. We haven't had any great problems with that. I think one area for the long term is, I mean, there are many medicinal things in the jungles, in the bush, in Nigeria that should be explored. We could have a fantastic medical research community. But I mean, more generally, we all know we need to export agricultural products. Go back to the basic question, though. If people aren't prepared to invest in Nigeria, we're not going to see these things come to fruition. So the fundamental issue is, and I think Ms. Asani put it best, is talk to the private sector to see what are the barriers to people investing in healthcare, in medicinal products, into cannabis. But I would certainly welcome a legislative change to make cannabis legal for export from Nigeria.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Nevin. The next question is for Mr. Chiemeka, and it says the COVID-19 is a global issue, but solutions have to be context specific. Also, should government be knocked down immediately because oil prices have dropped? What do you think about government being destitute in savings? Okay, I'm not sure if you...
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, right? There's a problem, so everybody looks. The government really does not have any business being in business, and just get out of the way. But because of the way things are done, to a large extent, a lot of people expect the government to be heavily involved in all of this, so they are holding the government responsible. Government revenues can be of various dimensions, right? Based on how it is now, we rely heavily on crude oil sales. Taxes are there, but there are other forms of revenues that the government can use. But given where we are today, government revenues is challenged. So today, government is looking to raise $6.9 billion from IMF, from World Bank, and from African Development Bank. The population is growing, right? So it will not be out of place, right, for government to begin to now step back and begin to create an enabling environment that will allow the private sector to thrive. With the thriving private sector, they can raise the sort of revenues required to address some of the infrastructural gaps that will help jumpstart the economy and ensure that businesses and industries are open. They are hiring people because people need to be paid. People need to have revenues, income to be able to jumpstart and ensure that post-COVID, the recovery is a lot faster it should be. And I think that's the way to view that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chiemeka. The next question is directed at Mrs. Bego in Kemdilim. It says, good morning. I am a librarian. For organizations that have library and document control departments, how do they work remotely and remain relevant in this new reality?
So I think that it really depends on the state of the organization. If the organization is fully digitalized, then obviously it's easy to work remotely. If not, then there's really not much that you can do at this point. So I think that organizations also have to look at, why am I unable to work remotely? And what do I need to do in the future? So I think that organizations that are currently unable to work simply because they did not invest in their digital and technology should now use this time to really think about their strategies, what they need to do in order to post-COVID, once the lockdown is over, what they can really do to invest into their businesses and restructure their businesses and ensure that their businesses are completely digital. Because I think that remote working in movement will continue for a while, even if the lockdown is lifted. I do not think that we will go back to business as usual, and the revenue losses for private and public sector organizations that were simply not ready are really massive. And we can use the Corporate Affairs Commission as an example. They've been really struggling with their technology infrastructure in terms of approving new company registrations. And this is the time where people are starting new businesses, right? So you can imagine the revenue loss that government is experiencing. So I think that we are going to see companies and government organizations and parastatals really looking inward and looking at how can we deploy technology so that if we are in this same situation again, we can continue to make revenue. So, if you don't have digital at the moment, you just have to wait it out, use this time to strategize and build as soon as you come out of it.
Thank you very much, Nkem. The next question I'll direct at Mrs. Sani and Mr. Larry Shutunde. Kindly take not more than 2 minutes each to respond to the question so that we can proceed to wrap up the session. The question is from Edusa Omorigie. It says, from the various speakers, it is obvious that people skills, both management and general staff, will be the most important drive in digital transformation in Nigeria. My question is, are academic institutions in Nigeria, both secondary and tertiary, prepared to play their role given the low level of infrastructure at their disposal when compared to others in technologically developed countries? Mrs. Sani, over to you.
Yeah, unfortunately, our public academic institutions are totally unprepared for the digital age, both in terms of those who are going to teach them and also in terms of the infrastructure. And it is a big challenge for not just government, but for all of us, because even those of us in the private sector, we need to remember that these students that are being grown are the workforce of tomorrow that is being built for us. So I think this is a wonderful time for private institutions to begin to sponsor faculties, sponsor infrastructure in faculties. And by the way, there is no law against partnering with a particular institution that can then raise and train people for your industry. So I chair the capital market committee for the inculcation of the capital market curriculum into Nigeria's tertiary institutions, which was set up by the SEC. And one of the initiatives that we're working on is partnering with specific institutions whom we are going to groom to help us to raise input into the capital market, because it's an area where we have a huge dearth of skills for the future. So those are the kind of initiatives that I think private sector might want to plug into, begin to partner with these universities to develop people that can then, that will have the digital smarts and everything else that we need them to have for them to join the workforce of the future.
Mr. Shotunde, please.
Yes, thank you very much. For this purpose, I think the government and the people, as in the private sector, should collaborate. Because we've seen instances where in the advent of COVID, a lot of public schools don't have access to tutorials, while their private counterparts are always online, talking to their teachers, doing a lot of things with digital channels, doing a lot of things on the website, doing a lot of things. So this is a disparity that we've noticed. So in this instance, government should come up, partner with the private sectors, let the private schools partner with public schools, the private universities partner with public universities so that they can achieve that basic objective of getting tutorials to people online. And at the same time, we should look further into investment in all these digital channels. If the government is able to do that, they should probably collaborate with telcos and bring out something good for all these universities, public universities. Then we'd know that what we're going to get from them is going to be of quality rather than what we have now. And at the end of the day, we won't be able to use all the skills available. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shusunde. Let me take this time to announce that the poll results are up and showing on our screens. Please take a moment to look at them. This is a reflection of the responses or an aggregation of the responses that we have got from all the participants on this channel. I would like to thank very much all my panelists on this session. It's been extremely insightful, time just digging in and having, very deep conversations around the impact of COVID-19. I personally have learned a lot about digital transformation, about what the focus of business leaderships should be in this period. I have learned also that we need to look for people-centric solutions to preparing for the new normal for businesses. I think a lot has also been said about the positions that government should take and how to, deal with stimulus packages for businesses and even social intervention strategies for government and more efficient ways to ensure that, those supports actually get to the grassroots. I really like to thank you, Dr. Andrew Nevin. Dr. Nevin is the advisory partner and chief economist at PricewaterhouseCoopers West Africa. Thank you so very much for joining this webinar this afternoon. Thank you very much, Mrs. Nkem Dilim-Bego, the CEO of Future Software Resources Limited. Thank you very much, Mrs. Toyin Sani, the CEO of Emerging Africa Capital Group. Thank you, Mr. Jude Chiemeka, Divisional Head Trading Business at the Nigerian Stock Exchange. And thank you, Mr. Larry Shotunde, who's the Chief Financial Officer of Optima Energy Resources Limited. We'd like to thank especially Optima Energy Resources Limited for doing this, for sponsoring this event and making it possible to have such power panel discuss critical issues around COVID-19. At this point, I'd like to invite and hand over to Mr. Okiti, the CEO of Business Day, to give the closing remarks and wrap up the session. Thank you also to all the participants. Thank you for being so engaging. We see all your questions. We apologize we were not able to take all of them. And of course, people have asked whether a communique will be circulated on the back of this session. I'm sure that the CEO of Business Day will definitely address that in his closing remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so very much, Tosin. Let me add my voice to hers to thank everyone. But before I just express my thanks, it's been a very, very absorbing discussion. And I'm sure this discussion will continue because we have not seen the end of the road yet. This is just the start of the economic implications of COVID-19 and on different sectors of the economy. But this has been so beneficial to me as a business, someone that manages business. So it's been very, very insightful, amazing discussion, detailed. I mean, I just couldn't stop listening to all the discussion and the suggestions coming from the panelists. So I want to thank you all because I know from experience that it's not easy. It looks like 1.5 hours, but I know many more hours have gone into the preparation for this. So I thank you all so sincerely on behalf of Business Day and on behalf of all our subscribers and on behalf of the participants. I want to thank you all for your insight and for your ideas and for even the things that you have said about your company so that you could just help others. We thank you all. And I want to thank the moderating the session for 1.5 hours. I mean, that is incredible. Thank you so very much. And our sponsor, Optima Energy, we thank you so very much. Thank you for doing this. And we look forward to more collaborations in the future. To all our participants, thank you. And I hope you have enjoyed it as much as I did. And as Tosin has said, we will get back to you with a summary of the discussions. And I've been asked to tell you that also that to continue to enjoy the benefits of Business Day across all our platforms, we encourage you to be a subscriber. So on behalf of Business Day, I thank you all, and I hope that you all have a great afternoon. Thank you. Tosin, you can